Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson, and we're continuing our study of the Beatitudes. We're in Matthew chapter 5, verse 7. And let's not forget that Jesus, in the Beatitudes, at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, is doing nothing less than reorienting the way we see the world, so that we see the world not through human eyes or according to our human impulses, but we see the world through his eyes and through his sacrifice. And we're in verse 7, and if we doubted this is what Jesus is doing, let's read this. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Now, of course, you cannot give mercy to someone who has not wronged you or harmed you in some way. By definition, mercy is something you extend to someone who has caused you harm, who's hurt you. And he says this is a blessing to be able to extend mercy, because if we extend mercy, we will receive mercy. He's going to elaborate on this in his model prayer later on in chapter 6, when he tells us to pray, forgive those who trespass against us as we forgive those, or forgive our debts, as we have forgiven those who are our debtors. And then he makes this editorial comment on that prayer. It's the only part of the prayer that he comments on afterwards. If you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. And of course, that is because we have received grace first. And as the story Jesus tells in Matthew chapter 18 is in that story, in this gospel, in a later sermon, Jesus tells the story of the unrighteous servant, the one who was forgiven about the equivalent of $10 to $14 million debt, which it's mind-boggling how a day laborer could incur such debt and was forgiven that debt. And then he himself would not forgive a debt which was itself substantial for a day laborer, something that was worth about a third of a year's wage, and yet he wouldn't forgive it, and that man was then no longer shown any mercy whatsoever. We have received great grace, and therefore grace is going to be expected of us as we interact with each other. And of course, what did Jesus come to do but to be our sacrifice and to give us grace? And so to refuse to be graceful and merciful ourselves is, in a very real sense, to deny, to reject everything that Jesus is here for. And so it's quite a rebellious thing to hold a grudge. It is. It's quite an insulting thing to God. It's quite a blasphemous thing to hold a grudge and to expect justice for yourself and to not give grace. And of course, since that's what Jesus himself did, and we are his disciples, if we're going to follow the path, then we're going to do that too. Paul says in Philippians 3, a passage that we're going to talk about in the coming sessions as we finish up our study of the Beatitudes. He says, I want to know Jesus. I want to know everything about Jesus. I want to have the full Jesus experience. Philippians chapter 3, I want to know him. I want to know the fellowship of his sufferings. I want to be conformed to his death. Jesus says all that. And that's exactly what a disciple does want, because a disciple is a follower. And if we're going to walk in the footsteps of Jesus, that's where those footsteps are going to lead. They're going to lead us to a place where we readily show mercy to others who are undeserving, because that's exactly what Jesus has done for us. Okay, thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. When we're together next time, we'll talk about the concept of being pure in heart, and we'll have to think about that for a bit, because I think we have our own definitions of heart and of pure, and what it means to see God as well. That's an enormous claim Jesus is going to make next time. We'll pick up there in verse 8. Thank you for joining me.